look at painting like I look at life itself. Each new discovery or thought opens up a whole new set of possibilities. Artist Clyde Aspect. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Britt Snyder focuses on capturing memories and feelings on canvas. Though influenced by late 19th century Impressionism, Britt's paintings are clearly a modern take of impressionistic figurative, still life, and landscape painting. His portrayal of the human figure resembles a character who once inhabited our dreams of the night, and now their features slowly dissolve from our waking memory. His paintings reference classical painting, photography, and pop culture with an emphasis on capturing and presenting moments in time and presenting the core essence of the portrayed subject. Just as a film director of a feature film uses the concept of the wandering eye in a shot, a view of the actor's eyes without revealing what the actor sees, Britt invokes a similar feeling of curiosity and mystery in his paintings. We want to know what his subject sees and feels. We are left with questions as his figure glances beyond the edge of the canvas. When you view one of Britt Snyder's paintings, you begin to hear in your mind the music of life, and in the periphery of your vision, you discern that there is a sense of something more. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. You know, here in Georgia, it's a rainy day. It's a rainy day today. The high is going to be in the 70s, which is unusual for the Atlanta area at this time of year. But it did one thing. It reminded me of your artwork in a positive way. Your art has a very dreamy look to it, a very unique approach to a figurative as well as other types of painting. And so it gives me great pleasure to talk with you, Britt. I'd like to welcome you to The Artful Painter, and I'm looking forward to talking about you and your art making.
Oh, it's great. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
So you're located, you said, up in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I've been in Groton now for about 3 years, and we've lived out in Massachusetts now for about 15. Yep.
Yeah. Do you find living in a place like the New England states affects the type of art that you do or your approach to art making?
Absolutely. So yeah, no, I mean, kind of like you're saying, I think your surroundings definitely affect what you're doing. I remember even going back when I lived in California, I went to a painter's studio, and I remember that his paintings were kind of tinted green, and we were talking about that a little bit, and his studio was painted green. So yeah, I think that, yeah, anywhere you're around is definitely going to affect your subject matter, your color, everything. Absolutely.
I wonder if his studio being painted green had a big influence on that.
Yeah, no, it did. It did. That was sort of where that first clicked for me. Yeah, you could really see it. And we were talking about it, and his paintings had this kind of neat little green tint to them, which obviously I like a lot. And yeah, the studio was the same color. So yeah, it definitely it affects everything.
So it was a creative choice for him to do that.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've ever heard of that. Most artists, what they want to do is get as neutral a lighting situation. Of course, now look at my office. I'm a hypocrite. I've got a big turquoise beachy scene behind me, and yeah, I know it affects the colors, but hey, this is what I got, you know.
No, yeah, it absolutely affects you. Yeah, I keep my my studio space. I definitely keep it all kind of neutral, actually, for that reason, because I don't want to. If I want to change up my color, I feel like if I did have, red walls or something like that, it'd be hard. You see it. It's in your field of vision and definitely affects color and everything. But yeah, no, like I was saying, it was it definitely has that effect for sure.
So, how would you describe your paintings?
So I really love the sort of the late 1800s, John Singer Sargent and Sorolla and that kind of painter. But obviously, I'm not living in that time, so I have a lot of that influence from that time era. But I bring my own life and a lot of the modern experiences that I have into that kind of thing. So I feel like my art is reflective of that kind of language, I guess. but kind of filtered through my own lens.
I think a lot of us are really impressed with Sargent and Sorolla and the triumvirates of painting. But your paintings, if I were looking at them, I wouldn't say that was influenced by Sorolla. You have a very unique voice in the way you express your portrait work, your figurative work. Where did that development come from? I'm trying to find out, how did you come to that point?
I went through a period of time, I think like all painters do, where we have our heroes, and I was trying to emulate them, even down to the subject matter, and it didn't connect with me. So I love, obviously, using Sargent as an example, I love Sargent, but he was painting those paintings for a whole other reason. I mean, it was a whole situation that doesn't exist as much today. So I was kind of trying to do that thing when I was starting out, and what happened was eventually I just hit a place where I'm like, I need to look at other things. So I think it's a result of, I guess, coming up on that kind of thing. Sargent, I'm using Sargent as an example again, but then opening my mind up to painters like Gerhard Richter, Jenny Seville, Alex Konevsky, that kind of thing. And the original thing that I started with never really leaves, but then you kind of bring this other stuff into it. And then also really just making a concentrated effort to take whatever I did and be authentic with it and put it into stuff that's relevant to me. So with my paintings, I make a point of always having somebody in the painting who is in my life and meaningful to me, so that no matter what, it's going to have a bit of a personal feel to it. So I guess the best way of putting it is I started out like everybody, trying to emulate those painters, and then just gradually picked up influences over time, and then tried to say something personal with it. And that's really how I've ended up where I'm at right now.
Well, I'm looking at some of your paintings right now on your website, and one of the things that stands out to me is there's a texture to it, but it's as if water is running down. It's like looking through a glass that has moisture on it, like a shower door window, yeah, or something like that. So it's a very interesting approach to rendering your subject matter. Can you talk about that a little bit? Explain what's going on there.
Okay, so that actually comes ironically from necessity rather than in attempting to do something. So I'm not a small person, and I probably like a lot of people, I tried to paint little 18 by 24 paintings, nice and clean, and try to get that perfect little highlight in the eye. And eventually I'm just like, this is not working for me. So I'm just going to sort of embrace the sloppiness, embrace the brushiness in my work. And if I've been painting in small spaces pretty much since I've started, relative to the size of the paintings, and sometimes when I move them, they get banged, and eventually I'm just like, forget it. like this is just the way I paint. So the effect of the water, it's I do have a lot of stuff I could say about that, but the general gist of it is the technique actually comes out of really it's really natural to me, and it started from just basically saying, I just can't paint these type paintings. This is how it's going to be, and it's the way my hand moves naturally.
Oh, that's interesting. I just that reminds me of, I was watching a friend of mine. He's very tall, and he was painting, and he can't use a pochade box like I have, because I'm just a short, dumpy guy. So it's not something I would normally think about. But his choice was he had to have something where the canvas is up high and the mix box is way low, so that he could actually just manipulate the paint even at the bottom of the panel or the canvas there. So I never even thought about that. It's funny how our unique perspectives in lives, we don't always see what another person's going through there. Yeah,
it affects everything. I mean, your size is everything. So once again, I'm 6'1", and when I started out, I'm trying to paint these 18 by 24 paintings with these little brushes, and it doesn't suit my temperament. It doesn't suit my physical size. And I found that my paintings just connected with me and other people as well, as soon as I just sort of embraced that and said, I'm just going to paint larger, because my hand, I don't have a very steady hand. I'm tall, I'm clumsy. And the technique is just kind of, it looks like that, because I think that's a natural reflection of who I am.
Do you remember the first painting that you did where you said, yeah, this is what I want to do?
I do. Actually, I really do. I'd been trying things for a while, and I think it was honestly the point where I just sort of let go, and I just said, this is just how it's going to have to be. And it actually came out of necessity. I was getting my MFA, and I was in a state where I think, like a lot of us can relate to, I was trying to do some things that people were asking of me, and it wasn't working. And out of frustration, I just said, I'm just going to paint, and this is how the paintings are going to be. And if people don't like them, that's just how it's going to have to be. And that was actually the painting that kind of kicked it all off. And it was a painting, I called it Depth, and it was a painting of actually of my wife kind of tilted towards the wall. And it looks pretty different from what I'm painting right now in a lot of ways, but that was definitely the one. And that was sparked out of that experience.
So it was the genesis of what would come from there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, wow. And I noticed that it seems like your wife and perhaps your children serve as wonderfully cooperative models in your paintings. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's true.
Are you working from references, or do you set up a paint from life, or do you kind of do a photography session, or how do you go about it?
I'm painting from photography on these. I'd love to paint from life. It gets a very different effect. So I love painting from photo reference. I love painting from life. They're both really different. In the paintings that I'm doing right now, it's kind of a lot of things, actually. I will shoot photos, just kind of shoot photos, and then I look at them and I look at things that I connect with in those photos, and I find something that's interesting to me. And it could be just the way the light is hitting something, something that is the way that the person is holding their face and expressing themselves, just anything that connects with me. And then I just start to collage photos together. I'll put a different arm on somebody if I need to, using Photoshop. And then I just paint from that as reference. My background is, I really enjoy painting from life. There are actually some that are painted from life, but they would be more like a still life or a landscape kind of thing. So anything that's going to be a figure that's in motion, or anything with more of a composition, I'm going to use photography right now, just because I like the effect that it gives me in the process.
Well, having a digital background myself, I I enjoy the creative process of using the digital to composite ideas, experiment with ideas. I like hand sketching too, but the compositing of the software that we have is just astonishing. It's an astonishing tool, and I'm seeing more and more artists embrace that technology to help them create their paintings. I think it's a wonderful synthesis.
Yeah, I did start off with restricting myself to painting only from life, but once again, it just gets a really different result. The model's just naturally going to be a little more posed, and actually that was a necessity for me to break out of that, because my work was looking very much like studies. So when I was a student, I felt that I was, the model would pose for half an hour and then take a break, pose for half an hour and take a break, and we would do figure paintings over a period of a couple of weeks. And when you're done, you've got a nice painting of a person, with their hands up on their knee, but it just didn't express anything to me. And actually, to break out of that, I needed to kind of open my mind up to using different working processes. And for me, that's what's resulted in what you see right now.
I wonder if that you triggered a thought in me. Years and years ago, there was a photographic style, where you hired the wedding photographer, everything was posed. You went to a portrait studio, you were posed. I guess it was a hangover from the 1800s. But today, what people are doing with photography is a much more candid. I don't know if candid, a real life. It seems to be more natural than the poses, and so the photos don't look as stiff. And I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm sorry about that, Britt. But
No, it's a great. It's a really. It's a tough thing. So actually, working with any photography, avoiding that sort of the toothy smile pose
mm,
pictures or something. Whenever I'm painting a painting, the thing that I always ask myself is, what's the point? Like, does this thing need to exist as a painting? And I feel like, at least for me personally, that if I paint something and it just looks like kind of an impressionistic an interpretation of a photograph, I question whether it needs to exist as a painting. So when I'm working with anything, whether it's life, photography, digital, oil paints, anything like that, the number one thing is this thing that I'm making, does it need to exist as the thing that I'm making it? Like, what is the point of what I'm doing, if that makes any sense?
yeah, and I'm trying to grasp that. I mean, what is the criteria? If you could go into that, how
Yeah.
would you determine? Okay, this is a painting that should exist, and here's one I shouldn't do.
For me, it's all about the end feeling about something. So I feel like if I'm painting a photograph and it's just it comes out to be just kind of a stiff interpretation of a photo, to me that just doesn't feel like it meets the goals that I'm looking for. Whereas if I can use that reference and it will give it some believability, like I can see things in it and I can put those on the canvas, and it exists as a painting that really used that photography to get to the end goal, but it exists. Boy, it's a hard thing to describe. I'm trying to think of the best way that I could really describe it. I just feel that it needs to. I don't really even know how I can answer that question. I'm sorry about that. I'll have to think about that for a
I don't
minute.
think it's anything you need to apologize for. The
Yeah.
reason I asked this question is this something that I struggle with. I hear these expressions, and then I wonder, am I feeling that? Am I feeling the same emotion? Am I making this similar judgments in something? And a lot of times I wonder, okay, I'm just doing this because I like it.
Right.
Is that good enough? I hope so, but sometimes people are a little more deep in their thought processes like you. So
Well, I think it's a kind of a boring and old argument, but I think the question about even forget about photography, even just realism.
yeah.
Uh, does it need to exist? Like, why am I doing this? Is important. That's just the number one question I ask myself whenever I make something. It's just, does this thing work as a painting, and are all the things that I'm using to get to that process, is it adding to it?
There seems to be an element of a narrative to these paintings. It's mysterious. One of the things that really drew me to your paintings is your compositional choices. I will see a figure looking off the edge of the painting, and there's something is, and so that denotes to me there's a mystery. What is beyond that edge, or what is that person thinking? They have their back to the sea, the magnificent sea. Why would they do that? What are they looking at? And I think that's an interesting development in your painting, an interesting approach to how you compose your paintings.
That's exactly right. Actually, it really, for me, it really expands a picture exactly when you can see that there's something happening off the stage, and I think exactly, if you have somebody whose their gaze is looking off the picture, I mean, the picture is basically just one way that I think about it is I think about pictures as either sort of a window or a stage. So I feel like a smaller painting is almost like a window. And you're looking through that window and there's something that's happening off to the side. And right, if the gaze means everything. If somebody is engaging you, if they're looking right at you, that's just such a different dynamic than somebody looking off to the side. And yeah, I do that intentionally quite a bit because I feel, once again, talking about the meaning of something, when somebody is looking right at you, it's just a totally different picture than if somebody's looking off to the side. And I just like that effect in my image, exactly what you're saying. It will just give the viewer the sense that there's something more there, and it's not as confrontational as when they're looking directly at you.
Exactly. And there's a melancholiness to it, but not in the sense of sadness. It's more contemplative, if that makes any sense. My mastery of the English language has failed me today, but that's what I feel when I see these paintings. I'm not it doesn't make me sad, but I'm thinking these subjects are in deep thought about what they're engrossed in, whatever their thoughts are, and then I want to know what are they thinking.
Well, I think that's really important, honestly. Going back to painters I was influenced by, Whistler would be a really good example. And in Whistler's work, I feel like that's kind of what makes it great. Like you can certainly name painters who are the technical or better equal or whatever, but Whistler is an unbelievable painter. Whistler's a great painter on any level, but Whistler's an amazing painter because of that kind of thing. Like when I look at one of his landscapes, one of his sort of night seascapes or whatever, it has that sense that there's more to it than just, you never look at it as just a pleasant landscape. There's something really there fascinating.
Yeah. There is an understated exuberance in those paintings. So
thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I can see.
Large canvases typically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I'd like to go larger. Unfortunately, I'm in a relatively small space at the moment. I think, like a lot of us, I was mentioning to you before, with COVID, just studios are shut down, spaces. I mean, it's starting to open up right now, but yeah, I'd love to paint larger, but there's a lot of practical reasons why I can't right now, unfortunately.
So how do you psych yourself into that? I know I get this question a good bit. How do you, or I'll get the artist envy, like they'll envy my office, and I'm thinking, huh? How do you envy this? And so I find myself envying the workspace of, say, Richard Schmid, when I see a picture of his studio or somebody else, and I think, how do you psych yourself into being content with what you've got?
Well, that's a good question. I think workspace is really, it's not about the workspace, it's about the work you make. As long as I can, practically work with it, it works for me. So, with galleries and whatnot, there are a lot of practical concerns about size. So that typically the highest I go right now is 48 inches. But there's something really amazing about big paintings, like big paintings. I would love to someday at some point make some sort of, gigantic work. But once again, there's just practical reasons why you can't. There's so many reasons right now.
Are you finding that the galleries are specifying a size? Is that what you're saying? Or they're saying there's a max size they want? Or
there's a max size. They're walls. I mean, it depends on physical space of the gallery. So the one that I'm working with right now, typically it's about 48 inches. Okay, yeah. So the physical space is important, but the best I can really say with that is you work with what you have. So my space right now, I've got relatively short ceilings, and the size, I think the highest that I'm working right now is about 48 inches on one side.
Do you have a permanent place set up in your apartment to do that?
I do.
Okay.
I do right now. I'm actually looking to, we're possibly building a space out in the yard, building a little studio out in the yard for me right now. But yeah, I've got a little space in my house right now that I'm painting. But like I said, with COVID right now, studios are everything's just been shut down.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's really changed the way a lot of people have worked and are working. Hopefully things will eventually become safe to open up. And of course, the real estate market is just bonkers right now, and I don't know how that's affecting rent with commercial spaces and things like that too. So
I'll find out soon, probably when I stick my head out there.
I really appreciate seeing artists. They make the best of their workspace and they create amazing work. And that's a good lesson for me, good lesson for everyone. You can paint pretty much anywhere if you
Right.
put your heart to it.
Well, there's practical reasons too for size. Once again, I'm showing in the gallery. So I sent some paintings fairly recently to a gallery that were 48 inches by 48 inches, and just that extra 48 to ship it, the shipping costs, and it's just there's practical reasons behind size as well. So I always try to make the images that I want to make, but then there are moments where you have to take that into consideration. Like the size of the gallery walls, the shipping, that kind of thing. So typically, 48 is pretty much as far as I'm going right now.
I guess you got to think about, okay, where's that painting going to go? Not just a gallery wall, but a homeowner's own, a collector's wall is, there's limited space.
And size also affects the dynamic of the piece too. So I think that there are some things that are just too much when they're too big. I've definitely made some pieces when they're sized up, they look, I'm glad I painted it that big. And then there's some things I'm like, I think that would have actually been a little nicer at a smaller size. And that actually kind of goes into like my thought about window and stage. Some things, if it's a more intimate piece, I almost feel like it kind of works well as if you're just kind of looking through a little window. And I think if something is more immersive, it's like, that's actually what's so great about when you look at those old Rembrandt paintings or something like that, and they're huge. And when you get up to it, it completely takes up your field of view, and it feels like a stage. And I think that's why they work so well sometimes, because they're just so immersive in that way.
How do you go about choosing the aspect ratio for a painting? I mean, some are rectangular, some are square. What are the criteria that goes into your mind in choosing that aspect ratio?
I probably should think that through a lot more than I do, but honestly, I just kind of resonate with what I'm looking at, and I mess with different croppings, and some things just feel right after a while. I love the feeling of a square painting. So lately, whenever I can, there's something about just the square that really resonates with me. But the answer is really, I just kind of mess with the cropping and ultimately whatever works out. And I cut the boards after I come up with the composition. And some of my sizes are pretty wacky, actually, because of that. So I come up with the compositions first. And then when I decide that I want to paint it, I have to make a board that's going to be that size. So I'll cut whatever, or I have a friend who makes canvases for me, not canvases, but he makes cradled board for me, and we'll cut it to that size. So if I come up with something, I'm like, it's kind of weird, that's 32 by 70 inches or something crazy, that's what it's going to be, and we're going to cut it and paint on that.
Well, a practical consideration of that is it's not it's not a standard size, so you don't have to worry about people stealing your frames in your galleries.
That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. And framing can be tricky sometimes with my paintings. I paint sort of 50-50 between framed and then pre-made boards that a friend of mine makes for me.
So when you say board, is it hardboard or is it MDF, or what are you painting on?
I will paint on, the boards are cedar, and they're
Cedar?
they're cedar boards with just like I think it's a 1.5 inch cradle on it, and then sometimes I paint it on masonite as well. And there's nothing really fancy about it. I just gesso it, so it's just a gessoed board of some kind.
I've never heard of painting on cedar. That's a new one for me. Do you just put gesso on it? That's it?
Yeah, I just gesso it. So typically, I use just an acrylic gesso. Honestly, I just gesso it, and I put on maybe 3 coats of gesso, and that's enough. They don't absorb, and I've seen my paintings 6 years later, and there's no problems with it. So the main thing with gesso is you just don't want it to absorb into the board or the canvas. You need to put enough thickness on there so that it really takes it well and doesn't absorb.
Are you using, I forgot to ask you what your medium of choice, is it oil or acrylic? Or
it's oil paint.
Yeah. Have you tried the non-absorbent acrylic gessos like Michael Harding has?
No, I use kind of just regular old Liquitex gesso.
It does the job.
But it does the job. Nothing fancy about it.
course, I see a lot of the staining effects and the running effects you have in your painting. It made me think of Richard Schmid's book, Alla Prima, where he talks. It's only lead ground.
Oh my God.
And he doesn't want he didn't want the paint to stain the ground. And I think, oh man, I don't know that I could handle that, but I see his point.
Yeah, well, he's definitely one to listen to with anything that he's teaching. But I will say that with that stuff, I think, at least for me, you can take that too far. I went to an artist studio many years ago. She had a interesting little workbench set up with kind of cool looking vials of powder, and I asked her what it was, and it was powdered cadmium and powdered lead. And to me, it's just like,
what?
Yeah, it's like, just go buy the paint. I don't want powdered cadmium.
It'd be
in my
safer. House. I mean, the immersion. Well, I don't know. I'm not using the right terms, but the particles get coated so that they're more safe to handle.
Yeah, I honestly, at least for me, I don't think you're going to see that payback in your work. I
No.
feel like the materials we have are so much better than the paintings that we look at that they were working with. And I mean, I'm like everybody. I pay attention to what kind of whites, yellow over the years. I read up on all that. But in all honesty, a lot of the stuff I use is just straight out of what you would get in an art store. I use a lot of Winsor Newton and Rembrandt paints, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a balancing act. I've been in forums where they're really dedicated toward the conservation, our archival quality of the materials. And I do believe we have a responsibility that what we sell to a customer, that it's going to hang in their house.
Yeah.
Especially they pay, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for a painting. It's like a car. You expect that car to last quite a number of years. Yeah. But on the flip side, it seems like there may be an obsession that if you spend so much time with that, you never get around to actually painting something.
No, I totally agree with you. I think it is really important to, if you're selling something to somebody, it has to hold together, absolutely. But then I agree. Sometimes I think fascination with materials can almost become a defense mechanism, where you're not focused on the work. Sometimes, but yes, no, I agree. You definitely don't want your paint to peel up, and but I just have not had that problem with my work.
Well, I had a YouTube video that I did several years ago, and it's got the most views of any video I have out there. That video elicited a ton of comments, and some of it's quite rigorous, for lack of a better word.
Well, it's tough. A lot of great painters do some pretty interesting things that take some risks. I know a painter who shall remain unnamed that told me, with a painting that you would never believe was done, that they painted acrylics on top of the oils, and then oils went back again on top of the acrylics, which archivally is going to be pretty interesting.
Well, that may be a nightmare.
That might possibly be a nightmare. I don't know if this is true or not, but I think Odd Nerdrum was having some issues with some of his paintings. Yes. So, and if you look at his work, if you see it in person, it looks like he does a lot of scumbling and glazing, and I mean, that stuff can be tricky, over time. But he's getting the vision he wants, and his paintings are great. So, I don't know. It's kind of a trade-off. But yes, no, you definitely don't want your painting to peel off, and if you're selling to people, it's your responsibility absolutely to give them something that's going to hold together.
Well, artists like to talk about art, but I think sometimes we end up talking more about the tools and the materials.
It's fun. And honestly, with the tools, with art, a lot of the stuff I use is either not that fancy, just downright. With paint, I'm picky about my paints. But with brushes, I oftentimes just use brushes straight from Walmart. I mean, it works. They're fun.
Well, I've got chip brushes from Ace Hardware.
Yeah,
got a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, and sometimes I think if a brush is too good, that's actually a problem I was having for a while. I was using brushes that I think the quality was too high, and it gave me such a predictable stroke all the time that I think it started to show in my work. And sometimes I like a brush that has sort of a stray bristle, and it will kind of give a little bit of randomness and take a little bit of the control out of my hands. And I think that actually sometimes makes for a better painting.
Those imperfect marks, or not imperfect, but yeah, like you said, the randomness of the marks. It was kind of interesting. I was painting with my 10-year-old granddaughter, and she did this panel, and she had taped it down, and there was some bleed through of the paint on each panel, and she wanted to paint that little bit of bleed through. And I said, honey, why don't you just leave it? Well, it looks like a person did it, and you're a person, you're the artist, it's got your touch. She's,
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
No, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, I think there's a tendency with all of us to want to have absolute control in the work that we do, and feel that we can replicate it. But I think there's definitely part of the talent is really just to know when you've made something, whether randomly or intentionally, and know when to leave it in.
First got on, I saw guitars in your studio there. Which came first? Was it the music or the painting?
Actually, the art definitely came first. So growing up, I was fortunate enough to have a grandfather who was an illustrator. So coming up, he was really instrumental in teaching me how to draw, and we didn't do any painting, but it was a lot of, like what you do with a kid, drawing. And then when I hit high school, just for whatever reason, I just kind of drifted into music, and I went that route for kind of a long time. But then I came back to art at a later stage. I came back to art when I was maybe about 23 years old. So and music is still a huge part of my life as well.
So do you just play for fun, or do you actually do live performances? Well, obviously before COVID.
Yeah, a little bit of both. So all for fun. But I have a band that I play with, just neighbors that we play just for fun. No, I'm not a professional musician. That dream didn't work out.
Mine didn't either.
Yeah, I'm not the rock star I thought I would be when I was 13. But no, it's still a huge part of my life, and I play guitar and just absolutely love playing guitar. And when I paint, I listen to music podcasts or music, and it's kind of my other passion.
Well, looking at of course, now this is going to reveal my age, but when I look at your paintings, I'm thinking more Moody Blues. But
it's interesting.
Who are you musically?
God, so I listen to everything lately. Just anything with guitar catches my interest. Lately, there's been a web show. There's a guitar player named Andy Wood, who is he's a country guitar player, a rock guitar player, and just talks about guitar. And I just kind of can't get enough about that. There's a guy named Rick Piatto that I listen to that talks about just he'll take a Joni Mitchell song and analyze it. And honestly, music for me, it's just, you'd be surprised. It's all kinds of different things.
But growing up, I mean, you said you had that desire to have play in a band. Who would you have been? Would you have been Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or would you have been Leonard Skinner, or who would you have been?
I think, honestly, growing up, I would have been in Van Halen or something like that.
Oh, so Van Halen! Oh, wow.
Yeah, I grew up. Yeah, I know. It's funny. I sort of feel that there's this impression that if you paint figure oils, you're going to have like a string quartet playing behind you. But just for me, where I grew up, it was just rock and roll. So I grew up in the Detroit area, and everything was just rock and roll basically. And like I say, I listen to all kinds of things. I mean, and just music is just a huge part of my life still.
Do you feel that there's some carryover in the music to painting? Does one influence the other?
I think so for sure. When I think about one of the parallels is, for whatever reason, I've never been somebody, I respect poetry and lyrics, but for me, it's always been just sort of the feeling that something gives me. So growing up, once again, in the Detroit area, if we listen to AC/DC or something like that, it's more just about the feeling that that stuff gives me. You know, if I'm driving my car, it makes me want to drive fast, and you're not necessarily like, what's he talking about? Because either it's A, really obvious, or B, maybe not that interesting. It's not something like maybe Paul Simon, where it's you know, it's more a story-based song. I think the way that that filters into my painting is, a lot of times what interests me in painting is more just about what something makes me feel like, and it's not necessarily so literal. So I'm not going to say I want to make a painting that's about sadness, so I'm going to take somebody and they've lost their dog and I'm going to paint. You know, I like something that's just going to make me feel like something. So with music, was always kind of the thing that was interesting to me, was just sort of what it would make me feel like, and not necessarily the literal. And I think that's what's translated into my painting quite a bit.
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, you could have the emotions on your sleeve like a good old country song, or it's more understated as a mood.
Right.
You know, Clyde Aspect has a lot to say about music and art. In fact, I've got one of his old books, Visual Music. And
no, that's interesting. I love his paintings. I've loved his paintings for a long time, but I've never really heard that. That's interesting.
A lot of artists refer to the rhythm. So it will reflect, their compositional choices will reflect the rhythm that may be reminiscent of a musical score. Of course, that's kind of a literal, almost a very literal take on it. I'm probably more in the ballpark of what you're talking about, where it's more of a mood, or it creates a mental image or feel.
Yeah, you know, something that was really a breakthrough for me with music and art was I was having trouble, because I was in a boat where I'd spent all my time drawing the figure, life drawing, but I couldn't turn it into anything that made any sense. So I was basically making a bunch of studies. I was making a portrait, still life, and that's great. But for me, I wanted to try and do something a bit more with it, just for my personal interests. And somebody said to me, look at videos of the songs that you like, because somebody has put that music to a visual that matches it. And I started to do that. I started to look at videos of artists that I liked, even just live performances and how they express themselves. And that started to pave the way for starting to make images for me.
Like who? Could you give an example of someone that...
Sure. At the time, I was listening a lot to this, I think they're a New Zealand band called The Naked and the Famous, and their videos were really visually interesting. And I like the music. It's kind of it's a pop band, and the way that the videos matched the music to me was really interesting. So it was a band called The Naked and the Famous, and I started to look at how they express themselves visually, because I like the music, and it really, in my case, actually started to really kind of launch some things for me.
That's interesting, because it does seem like I'm of the MTV generation. Well, actually, I'm a little older than that. But one of the things I noticed with music videos early on, there were just visuals set to music. They might hint at the story that's in the lyrics, but sometimes lyrics weren't necessarily a story. It was just a random play on words, which created a mood too. So
that was really influential for me, and that was something that I was struggling with quite a bit, because, like I was saying, everything I did looked like, you know, like a person would be sort of sitting down posed, and I know, let's put a book in their hand, and it'll be, but it just didn't, it never connected as anything more. It always looked like studies, and for me, it was just like, let's start looking at how cinematographers are expressing things, and that was a gateway for me. That particular band and whoever does their videos was really useful to me.
So in your bio, this is you make an interesting statement that caught my eye. It says your paintings reference classical painting, photography, and pop culture, with an emphasis on capturing and presenting moments in time and presenting the core assets of the portrayed subject. So I get the classical painting, I get the photography, but now the pop culture, where does that come in? How is
So
that expressed?
yeah, that's definitely not in my subject matter. That's more in the way that I think. So my background actually, prior to painting, I was an artist in video game development. And I think the way that that's affecting my work is not necessarily like, pop culture in the sense that I'm commenting on things, but I feel that just my sense of color and my sense of composition and really just the way I make images is still really informed by a lot of the stuff that I did when I was making video games. And I still love that kind of art. I look at, the way that they design characters, the way that they tell stories. And with a lot of modern art focused on entertainment, I still have a lot of that in my work. You don't see it as literally, so I definitely don't. It's not in the way that I comment about things. It's a lot in the way that I think about making images and the way that I handle color and just coming up with ideas.
Well, you dropped another interesting tidbit there, video game development. So how long did you do that, and what was your role in doing that?
So I was an artist in video games for about 10 years at different companies, and I would do anything that really needed to be done. So back then it wasn't it was a pretty big industry, but not as big as it is now. So I would animate characters, I would draw icons. So I remember I worked at a company for a couple of years, and you would select a little character on the screen, but they were tiny. And then to give the player more of a sense of the character, I would paint a portrait that would appear at the bottom of the screen. So I was the one who painted the portraits. And I remember I would design some characters for some games. I remember designing buildings for a game. And I was heavily involved in that for about 10 years.
What kind of software were you using to create those designs?
So a lot of that's Photoshop. So I did a lot of that work in Photoshop. We were using a thing called 3D Studio Max.
Yes.
And then there's a bunch of stuff that's out right now that just wasn't around when I was so there's a program called ZBrush that I used for a little bit while I was in industry, which is a much bigger thing now. And that's a digital sculpting program.
Do you ever find yourself dabbling with Procreate, for example, on an iPad?
I really should. I think it's great. For me, Procreate you're on an iPad with a pen, and I just like to, any chance I get to get away from a computer, I like to be on pencil and paper. So as great as Procreate is, personally, I'm just, my free time, I like to grab my sketchbook still. Or paint.
There's something satisfying about holding that physical piece of paper and a pen or a fountain pen and doing it that way. See, I worked in the digital world for so long that I wanted to go back to analog, but I can't quite give up the digital part. I guess that's why I podcast and make videos and, still got an active Adobe subscription. Why, I don't know, but.
Well, the digital stuff is great. And honestly, like a lot of the influences I talk about, so we mentioned Sargent towards the beginning. In all honesty, if they were alive right now, they'd be living in 2021. They'd be using tools in whatever way worked for them as well. So the digital stuff is great. I mean, anything that you can use to get you a better result, I think, is fair game. And I've always sort of felt like the way that the image comes out at the end, that's what matters. It doesn't matter if you're collaging or what you're doing.
Do you paint outdoors any?
I do. Lately, I've actually been doing quite a bit of painting watercolor in a sketchbook. I like to bring oils out and paint, but the problem is it's a lot, as any oil painter knows, it's a lot to tote with you, and then with selling my work in galleries, that's just not the work that I'm known for or that the galleries promote me with. So. I'll come back with a 18 by 24 oil painting, and I don't have as much of a place for it. And also, I love watercolor. So lately, I've been walking out with sketchbooks and watercolor and gouache, doing gouache and watercolor sketches.
Those are beautiful mediums, aren't they?
They're amazing.
Yeah, they're just so. I wish I was better at both of those. But it's wonderful.
Well, they're not really, watercolor's not really that different from how I paint with oils. So when I paint with oils, I paint very transparently in the beginning. I'll paint the painting as long as I can transparently. So if I want to add a light to something, I'll pull it out with a rag. So I work subtractively, which is like watercolor. With
Yeah.
watercolor, you're painting all transparently, and you're maybe dipping your rag into it to pull out lights. And then in the very end, I go opaque where I need to go opaque. And with watercolor, you just grab some gouache and work on top of it. It's kind of the same thing, actually.
So most of your paint they're all painted thinly, or is there an impasto layer to it as well?
Impasto where it needs to be. So I go thin for the whole thing, and then for like the last 25%, I'll come in and definitely use impasto where I want the light to catch something, and go thick and where it needs to be thick. But yeah, a lot of paintings, like if you look at Rembrandt paintings, a lot of it's a lot thinner than you would think. All those areas that are brown and dark, I mean, it's like
flat.
canvas. They're flat. Yeah, it's like canvas basically.
And then you see the white, and there's height to it.
Oh yeah. Well, he gets thick with impasto where he needs to, for sure. But
Yeah.
It was probably a later stage where he did that stuff.
Well, where do you see yourself going from here? Is there any other ideas that you're thinking about developing artistically?
I like the language that I've come up with right now. It feels very authentic to me at the moment. I always sort of feel like any sort of evolution I do, it happens gradually. So it's usually just adding one or two new things, and then over a period of 5 years, you'll look back and be like, I'm kind of doing different stuff. I am getting more interested in the landscape. So I moved to a lake about 3 years ago, and water's become a big part of my work since then, and I'm getting more and more interested in the landscape. I would love to work larger. I love the figure. I'd love to do more multiple figure stuff, but I think it's really I feel like I'm on a path that feels authentic to me, and I think it's going to be just kind of a gradual journey where I just add a few new things each time, and then we'll see where it goes.
Well, I think you've got a lot more to say.
Oh, thanks.
With that, yeah, it's extraordinarily beautiful work. I'm just impressed with it. I know some years back you won an award, I believe, with your painting, and I forgot where it was. Artist Magazine, was it?
Oh yeah, I did. That was that would have been 2000 something or other. Yeah,
Yeah, it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I do remember that. That was nice. That's always nice. I mean, anytime that you win something, it's nice to get some recognition, and that oftentimes leads to interesting things that follow. And yeah, that was great. I was happy to get that.
So what I'm looking for is something, an interesting story about you and a connection you might have made with another person with your art, a collector. Did you get any type of feedback about your art that just really made you feel good when you heard it?
I've never had a single incident like that. It's more just a bunch of smaller ones. It always makes me feel good when somebody buys your work. It's the ultimate compliment. It means that they think enough about what you're doing, which is really, when you think about it, doesn't really get any more complimentary than that. They think enough about what you're doing to support you and to put your work on the wall. So really, I've not had a single incident that stands out, but I've definitely had collectors write me and say how much they appreciate having my work, and that means so much to me. I don't think, actually, to be honest with you, with that, when I am not interacting with people, or I'm not selling my work, I don't really feel the motivation to do it as much. And I think I really depend on not the approval, but just the reason to do something. And I think that when somebody collects your work, it gives me the reason to make it, to add value to other people's lives, and also just in general, just to interact with other artists. I love going out to paint with people. So really, I would say that any sort of connection that I've had with collectors or other artists, the value that I've gotten has really been just when somebody says they appreciate my work enough to collect it, which just means the world to me.
I like to ask artists, what are they reading?
Yeah, a couple books come to mind. The Eric Fischel book. Eric Fischel's, I believe he's based in New York, and he's a painter, figurative painter, and he wrote a book called Bad Boy, and that was really influential to me because he came at it from a place where he was a purely abstract artist who taught himself to be a figurative painter, and he talks a lot about thinking about content, and that's actually where I got a lot of that thinking process of, what sort of physical person are you, and what sort of materials could you use with that. And that book was really influential with me on that. Once again, it was influential to me because it had less to do with painting. So a book like Alla Prima by Richard Schmidt is a fantastic book for learning how to paint, and some about why you paint as well. But for me, the Fischel book was amazing with that. And then also the book Just Kids by Patti Smith was just a really great read for me to learn to think more creatively and just to get an insight into somebody who I respect a lot. So those are two books that come to mind.
Where's the best place that people can find out about you and see your work?
I sell my paintings through Maybaum Gallery in San Francisco, and my website is brittsnyder.com, and I'm also on Instagram. I'm not as active on Instagram, but through Maybaum Gallery, and that's, I think it's just maybe maybaumgallery.com, and then my website is Britt Snyder, my name, BrittsNyder.com.
Hey, Britt, it's been a real pleasure talking with you on the show today. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate being here and having the opportunity to talk about my work. Thanks again.
I'm very appreciative of Britt Snyder for appearing in this edition of The Artful Painter. It's interesting, just a few weeks after I recorded this episode, the interview itself, I also had the privilege of hosting his session in the Vision X Live Conference of 2021. I believe there's a replay available. You can still purchase that, and you can see his session along with many, many other fine artists. It was a great conference to be a part of. I really enjoyed that. And now I'd like to acknowledge the associate producers of The Artful Painter. These are people who have made a contribution, a financial contribution to the podcast. Every little bit helps, and I really appreciate each and every one of the associate producers for doing this. This edition, I'd like to acknowledge John Bradham. He has contributed before, so he is now a recurring or repeat donor to The Artful Painter. So thank you, John. Really appreciate that. If you go to theartfulpainter.com and click on the Donate tab, you will see his name. If you scroll down beyond the Donate button and a little explanation about the podcast, you'll see a list of donors there. And wherever possible, I've included a link to their websites. So in this particular case, I want you to go check out John Bradham's website and view his art there. So John, thank you so very much for contributing. I want to thank each and every one of you for donating to The Artful Painter. So before closing out, I want to acknowledge and apologize to you. I've been slow getting episodes out of late. My intention this year was to do 2 a month, but it's been very difficult. There's been the pressures of the pandemic, caring for family responsibilities. There were major projects around the home that had to be done. And I also wanted to take time to paint more. And I appreciate you giving me that opportunity. I hope to pick up the pace a bit later this fall. I have a number of artists that I have scheduled and will be scheduling to interview, and I'm looking forward to sharing those future episodes with you. So thank you for your patience there. And I've also been working on a few side projects in connection with The Artful Painter, and I look forward to sharing those with you in the near future. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of The Artful Painter. May your tubes be full of beautiful and light, fast colors, and your brush strokes applied confidently. I'll see you all in the next edition of The Artful Painter.
picture on the TV.